Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Mhm.
Got to give a huge thanks to LitRPG Reads and that fine fellow Paul Bello for passing along this really cool article about magic jewelry by Emily Thorne.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one. Really interesting stuff. I'm always looking for new ways to spice up my campaigns with magic items. And jewelry is something I haven't really explored as much as I probably should, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to fall into the trap of just thinking about swords and armor and wands and stuff,
Mm.
but jewelry can be just as powerful and way more subtle.
Right. Plus, it's like every adventurer needs a little bling, right?
Exactly. And speaking of bling, Thorne's article got me thinking about this one campaign I ran where a simple silver ring ended up causing total chaos.
Oh, a cursed item, huh? Always a good time. What happened?
So I designed this ring, right? And it's supposed to be this super cool item that would let the wearer teleport short distances. Like, boom, you're out of there.
Handy for a quick escape, I bet.
Yeah, or for flanking enemies in combat, really shake things up. But here's the catch. Each time they used it, there's a chance it would malfunction.
Oh, I see where this is going. A little bit of unpredictable magic to keep things interesting.
Exactly. So sometimes instead of going where they wanted, they'd end up somewhere totally random.
Sounds like Thorne's advice in action, right? She's all about making sure magic items create memorable stories. So, what happened when the ring went haywire? Spill the tea.
Well, the first few times it was pretty funny, actually.
Yeah.
The rogue ended up in a treetop once. The wizard materialized right in the middle of some fancy banquet. Awkward.
I can imagine. But hey, at least it's good for a laugh.
Yeah, totally. But then things took a turn for the worse. The party was in this really intense dungeon crawl, right?
Mm.
And the paladin got separated from the group, cornered by like a zillion goblins.
No, not good.
Yeah, it was bad. He panicked and activated the ring, hoping to teleport back to the group, but
Oh, oh dear. Where'd he end up?
he ended up right smack in the lair of the dungeon's big bad boss, a hill giant with a serious attitude problem.
Oh, man. Talk about being thrown into the fire. So, what happened? Did they manage to get out of that mess?
It was a close call, let me tell you.
Mm.
A lot of frantic dice rolls,
Yeah.
some desperate prayers to the gods, and a whole lot of improvisation. But yeah, they eventually escaped, but it was definitely a story they never forgot.
And that's what I love about magic jewelry, you know. It's more than just a stat boost. It's a way to introduce these unexpected twists and turns into the narrative.
Totally. Thorne really nails it when she talks about how jewelry can connect players to the lore and history of the world. It's not just about giving you +1 to charisma. It's about, like, a family heirloom or a symbol of their past, something with a deeper meaning.
Yeah, like a ring with a family crest. That's more than just a cool design. It's a whole backstory, maybe even a mystery to unravel.
Mm.
How did your players deal with that unpredictable ring in the end? Did they get rid of it or embrace the chaos?
I'm curious too, did they end up selling it or something? Actually, they kept it. They figured out how to use it strategically, like accepting the risk for the potential reward.
Hmm.
They even started working the malfunctions into their role playing, coming up with all these rituals and superstitions around it. It became this hilarious inside joke, a story they still talk about to this day. Reminds me of another thing. Thorne talks about finding inspiration for jewelry designs. She suggests looking at ancient artifacts, folklore, even your players' backstories.
Yeah, that's gold. I mean, using real world cultures and legends is a fantastic way to make your magic items feel grounded and authentic, not just some random made up thing. Like, imagine a circlet based on Celtic knotwork. That could have some really cool powers related to binding or protection or something. Where else do you draw inspiration from when you're designing magic jewelry?
Well, one thing I always try to consider is the setting of my campaign. Like, if it's a desert kingdom, maybe there are amulets that help store water or protect against the sun. If it's a forest realm, you might have enchanted necklaces made from rare flowers, boosting those druid powers.
I like that. It's like you're saying, make the jewelry feel like it actually belongs in this world. It's not just some random loot drop. It's a part of the environment, the culture, the whole shebang.
Exactly. It's all about making the world feel more real. And that ties into what Thorne says about aligning the jewelry's theme with this setting. It's all about creating that cohesive, immersive experience. Like imagine a campaign set in a world where dragons are like these revered godlike beings. You could have necklaces crafted from dragon scales, granting the wearer enhanced strength or the ability to breathe fire.
Oh, that's so cool. It's not just a necklace, it's a symbol of power, a connection to these legendary creatures.
Right. It's all about the story, the meaning behind the item. And that brings us to the next step, I guess, designing the magical properties themselves. And Thorne makes this really interesting point. It's not just about what the jewelry does, but how those abilities reflect the item itself. Like, are we talking about simple enhancements to existing skills, like a ring of stealth or something? Or are we going for something totally unique, like a necklace that lets you talk to animals?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's got to make sense, right? You don't want to just slap any random power onto a piece of jewelry. It needs to feel connected to the item, like it's an extension of its essence or something. It's like, how do those magical properties connect back to the item's actual form and its place in the world? Like, if you had a pendant based on ancient Egyptian symbolism, for example, maybe it holds the power to resurrect forgotten deities or something, or manipulate time, you know?
Exactly. It's all about tapping into those rich cultural references, those ancient myths and legends, and finding ways to translate them into these exciting gameplay mechanics. So, what about you? What kind of magical properties do you enjoy working with the most? Do you have any favorites? Like, are you more into the straightforward buffs or the weirder, more out there stuff?
Oh man, I'm a sucker for anything that gives players new ways to interact with the world, like utility items,
Hmm.
a necklace that lets you breathe underwater, for example, or earrings that translate languages. Stuff like that just opens up so many possibilities for exploration and problem solving. It really lets players get creative with their role playing. Imagine a campaign where a key item is this pendant that lets you understand and speak with dragons. That could totally change the game.
That's awesome. I love that idea. And it really highlights how magic jewelry can be so much more than just a way to boost your character's stats in combat. It's like a key, unlocking new areas, new possibilities, maybe even new alliances with creatures you couldn't communicate with before.
Exactly. It's about expanding the horizons of the game, giving players these tools to explore the world in ways they never thought possible. And of course, let's not forget about the potential for conflict, intrigue. What about cursed jewelry, eh? Always a fun way to spice things up, get the players on edge a little bit. That's going to be really fun to design.
Yeah, cursed items are a DM's secret weapon. When you really want to throw a curveball at your players.
Totally. It's like, how can we mess with them in a fun way?
Exactly. And Thorin has some really interesting ideas about designing curses, like ones that unfold gradually, instead of just instant death or some obvious drawback. Imagine a bracelet that, like, subtly attracts misfortune to the wearer.
Okay, I like where this is going. Give me an example.
So let's say every time they roll a critical success, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a nearby ally suffers some minor setback. Or the bracelet grants them good luck, but it slowly poisons their mind, making them paranoid and distrustful, stuff like that. Oh, that's devious. It creates this constant tension between the benefits and the potential consequences.
Yeah.
It's not a straightforward curse. It's more insidious. It makes them second guess every decision, every roll of the dice.
Right. Thorn's all about creating these moral dilemmas for the players. You want them to really think about their actions and grapple with the consequences of using these powerful items. It's not just about inflicting pain or bad luck, it's about creating a narrative hook that adds depth and complexity to the game.
It's like, are you willing to pay the price for this power? You know, it makes you question what you're willing to sacrifice for the sake of your goals, which honestly is a pretty deep theme when you think about it. That's what makes cursed items so compelling. They're not just about the mechanics. They're about the story, the choices we make, and the consequences we face. And speaking of choices and consequences, how do we make sure our magic jewelry doesn't become too powerful or too easily accessible? Thorne mentions balancing power and accessibility, but how do we actually put that into practice at the table? What are some tips for making sure magic items don't completely break the
Well,
game?
Yeah, that's the eternal struggle, right? Finding that sweet spot where the items feel powerful and exciting, but not so overpowered that they trivialize the game. One approach is to think about rarity and cost.
Hmm.
Like a legendary artifact shouldn't just be lying around in some random treasure chest, right? It should be something the players have to really earn, maybe through epic quests, hidden in ancient tombs, guarded by fearsome creatures, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. You got
Yeah.
to work for it.
Exactly. It's not just about balance. It's about creating a sense of accomplishment, a sense of awe and wonder when they finally get their hands on this incredible treasure. If powerful magic items are too easy to come by, they lose their luster. It's like the difference between finding a rare gem and just picking up a pebble on the side of the road.
Yeah.
One is special, the other is just there.
I get it. Rarity equals value. And it's not just about the mechanics, it's about the story too, right?
Absolutely. Think about all those legendary weapons and artifacts in classic fantasy stories like King Arthur's Excalibur or the One Ring in Lord of the Rings. They're not just powerful, they're steeped in history, in legend. They represent something bigger than just a tool or a weapon. They hold a place in the collective imagination of the world.
I never thought about it like that, but you're totally right. It's like it's the difference between a mass-produced sword and, a blade forged by some master craftsman. Each one has its purpose, but that handcrafted one, it carries a weight of history, of artistry that just elevates it beyond its basic function.
Yeah.
And that's what we should be aiming for when designing magic jewelry too, right? Making them feel special, unique, connected to the world they inhabit.
Yeah, totally. It's all about going that extra mile, adding those layers of detail and significance that make them more than just another piece of loot.
And of course, you have to consider the power level of the item in relation to the character's abilities, right?
Yeah.
What's perfectly balanced for a high-level campaign could totally wreck the game for a group of newbies.
Oh, for sure. It's all about finding that sweet spot where the item feels both powerful and appropriate for the character's current stage of development. You don't want to be handing out magical nukes when all they need is like a slightly sharper sword.
Yeah, you got to match the power to the challenge, right? If it's too easy, it's not really fun anymore. It's like playing a video game on easy mode. There's no sense of achievement. You got to earn those victories.
Exactly.
And speaking of making things a little challenging, Thorne also mentions incorporating drawbacks into magic items. It's not just about limiting the number of times it can be used, though that's certainly a valid approach. You could also think about more subtle limitations, like environmental dependencies or something. Maybe a magic ring only works under the light of the full moon, or a pendant's power is amplified near running water, that kind of thing.
That's a cool idea. It forces them to think outside the box a little bit, right? They can't just rely on the item as a crutch. They have to consider the environment, the circumstances, use their brains a little bit.
Exactly. It adds a whole new layer of strategy and decision-making to the game, which is always a good thing. Speaking of making things a little more challenging for ourselves, what about using AI to help brainstorm ideas for magic items? Thorne mentions ChatGPT in the article. Have you played around with that at all? Yeah, I've been experimenting with it a bit, and it can be pretty helpful, especially when I'm feeling stuck or just need a little creative boost. You can give it a basic prompt like enchanted ruby pendant that grants the wearer, and then let it spit out all sorts of crazy ideas, magical properties, even backstories for the item. It's not always perfect, of course, but it's a good starting point.
For sure. It's like having a brainstorming buddy, someone to bounce ideas off of, get a fresh perspective. But as you said, it's just a starting point. It's up to us, the DMs, to take those raw ideas and shape them into something that feels authentic and meaningful within our own game worlds.
I think that's key, right? It's about using AI as a tool, not a replacement for our own creativity and vision. And speaking of creativity, we shouldn't forget about the players. Thorne talks about involving them in the design process, which I think is a brilliant idea. It's their game too, right? Why not give them a voice? So how do we do that? How do we get the players involved in creating these awesome magic items?
There are a bunch of ways to do it. You could ask them to come up with descriptions for the items their characters find, encourage them to think about the visual details, the materials, maybe even the history of the piece. Or you could let them suggest potential effects for a newly discovered item. Work with them to refine those ideas and create something that fits within the game's mechanics and lore.
I love that. It turns the whole loot discovery process into this collaborative storytelling experience, right? They're not just passive recipients of magic items anymore. They're active participants in their creation. It's like they're leaving their own mark on the world, their own little fingerprint on the grand tapestry of the campaign. And speaking of leaving their mark on the world, Thorne emphasizes that we shouldn't just be handing out magic jewelry as loot. We should be weaving these items into the story itself, making them integral to the plot and the characters' journeys.
Exactly. A magic item should be more than just a stat boost. It should be like a catalyst for adventure, a source of conflict, a key to unraveling ancient mysteries, that kind of thing. So how do we make sure our magic jewelry feels like an essential part of the narrative, not just some random trinket they find along the way?
Well, one way is to connect the items to the history and mythology of your world, right? Like, Imagine a powerful amulet that was once worn by some legendary king, or a cursed ring that holds the spirit of a betrayed lover.
I like that. By grounding these items in the lore of the world, you give them weight, significance. They're not just random drops. They're relics of the past, echoes of forgotten stories waiting to be rediscovered.
That gives me an idea. You could use magic jewelry to spark rivalries or alliances between factions, right? Like maybe there are two warring kingdoms, each vying for control of this powerful artifact that would give them an edge in the conflict. Or perhaps there's some ancient prophecy that foretells the coming of a chosen hero who will wield a specific piece of jewelry to save the world from destruction.
Yeah, it's all about finding those narrative hooks, those plot threads that you can weave these magical items into. Give them a purpose beyond just their mechanical effects. Make them matter. Make them drive the story forward.
And don't forget about NPCs. They can play a huge role in bringing these stories to life, right?
Oh, absolutely. They can be the creators of the items, the guardians of ancient secrets, or even like the unwitting victims of a curse. Give them a connection to these objects. Make it personal.
I'm already thinking of a quest where the players have to track down this reclusive enchanter who's the only one who knows how to craft this particular magic ring. Or maybe they have to bargain with a dragon who's hoarding a collection of enchanted gems.
That's a good one. Dragons and Treasure, always a classic.
And it reminds me of something else Thorne talked about, using magic jewelry for character development. It's not just about equipping your character with cool new abilities. It's about using those items to reflect their growth, their struggles, their aspirations. Make it personal, make it meaningful.
Totally. Like, a simple brooch could become this symbol of newfound purpose for a character who's lost their way, or a necklace could represent a character breaking free from the shackles of their past. These items can become so intertwined with who the characters are and how they see themselves within the world.
It's like they're carrying a piece of their story with them, a physical reminder of their journey. And it doesn't have to be some grand, epic thing either. Even a small, seemingly insignificant trinket can hold a lot of emotional weight if it's tied to a character's past or their relationships.
Oh, for sure. It's all about those little details, those personal touches that make these items feel real and significant to the players. And speaking of making things feel real, how we present a magic item can have a huge impact on how the players perceive it, right?
Oh, yeah. Presentation is everything. It's like, imagine the difference between finding a magic ring in some dusty old chest versus discovering it in a velvet-lined box tucked away in a secret chamber guarded by ancient statues.
Totally. The context, the atmosphere, it all adds to the mystery, the allure. It's like the difference between stumbling upon a hidden waterfall in a dense forest versus seeing a picture of it in a travel brochure. The experience is completely different.
It's about creating that sense of wonder, of discovery. Making the players feel like they've stumbled upon something truly special. And don't forget about the power of description, right? Thorne talks a lot about using sensory details to bring magic items to life.
Yeah, don't just tell the players it's a gold ring with a ruby. Describe the glint of the metal in the torchlight, the warmth of the gem against their skin, the faint humming sound it emits when activated, Make them feel it, make them see it in their mind's eye.
It's those little touches that elevate the game, It's what separates a good dungeon master from a great one.
So wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive into the world of magic jewelry and D&D. I feel like my brain is overflowing with ideas. Me too. It's clear that Emily Thorne has put a ton of thought into not just the mechanics of magic items, but also their narrative potential, their ability to enhance the storytelling experience. It's not just about stats and bonuses. It's about weaving these items into the very fabric of the game world.
And a huge shout out to Paul Bello, that fine fellow, for sending this article our way. He always seems to find the most fascinating stuff to share with us.
He does, always on top of the latest and greatest in D&D. So before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a little something to think about. If you could design one piece of magical jewelry for your D&D character, what would it be? What kind of powers would it have? And most importantly, what story would it tell?
That's a great question. We'd love to hear your ideas, so head over to the comments and let us know. We might even feature some of our favorites on the next episode. Until then, keep rolling those dice and may your adventures be filled with magic, mystery, and maybe a little bit of bling.